How's it going, and welcome to the channel. Today I am happy to be sharing with you a 6-month update to the Contractor 640. So this is kind of supplementing the initial review. If you have not seen that video, I highly recommend you watch it as a prerequisite to this update video. The reason I like to provide these updates is, let's be honest guys, the price tag or the investment needed to get into a high quality thermal optic it's a pretty penny. So I try to be as thorough as possible so you can make the decision if optics that I showcase on the channel are potentially the right choice for you or not. Now, what I always do when I initially review an electro-optic especially is allow at least a 90-day period behind the optic using it regularly before I share my thoughts and opinions, because I want those thoughts and opinions to be as educated as possible so you can be as educated as possible if you do decide on pulling the trigger on something like this. So I'm happy to let you know that in terms of reliability, no issues whatsoever. This optic hasn't frozen on me, it hasn't magically shut down unexpectedly, and it's maintained zero flawlessly. And speaking of, that's why you don't currently see it mounted, because the Kinetic Development Group mount that comes with this, that Armasight opted to include as a package deal, it returns to zero better and honestly more conveniently than any other mount I've used to date on the channel. So I'm not worried about how many times I mount and dismount it, whether it's to tether it to the computer, to download videos, to show you guys how it's doing without having to lug around the whole rig. I'm not worried at all. It does also potentially allow you to use it as a monocular. Granted, it's a little large. There are more compact ones like the Armasight Sidekick, for example, that I'm currently working on a review for you guys. But continuing on, mechanically, perfect function. Cosmetically, it's getting a little love. It's getting a little wear and tear because I have been using this regularly for 6 months, as I've mentioned, hence the 6-month update. So I'm not just using it as a safe queen. This thing is being mounted and dismounted, thrown on a hunting rifle, backseat of the truck, bouncing around, sometimes bouncing against other rifles in the back seat. I am using it almost exclusively at night. And I point that out because a lot of times I'm operating in the pitch dark, and there's times where I bump this inadvertently when getting out of a vehicle or walking through some brush. It's gonna see some physical abuse because of the environment I'm using it in, which I also assume is gonna be the environment someone who's looking into these kind of optics is going to be considering using it as well. So in those environments, it's held up flawlessly. No worries at all, other than the rubber objective lens cover did tear on me. Dark environment, pulling it out of vehicle, it snagged, it broke. What are you gonna do, guys? It does still cover, it's just no longer tethered. It used to hang down about yay low. It's kind of an inherent snagging hazard. I believe you can buy them replacements for like $12 online if you do want to have that tethered functionality back if you're in my boat and you do tear it. But that's the only thing I've broken on this optic, and that's very minor. It's soft rubber, kind of to be expected, sacrificial to protect that objective lens. Now, I have learned a few more things about the optic since my initial review, given that the length of time behind it has doubled. The first thing I will discuss and point out is that whenever it has reached a low battery status, so in the optic, it will warn the user low battery. You can't record from there on if you have a low battery status. I find this kind of interesting. My assumption is that the optic is doing whatever it can to extend your hunt or use of the optic as its basic, its primary focus as a functional thermal optic for as long as possible. Now, there was one instance for myself where I did engage a group of hogs after entering the low battery range of the optic. So I wasn't able to record that hunt to share with you guys, unfortunately, but in theory, if the optic was prioritizing additional processing power, the optic may have died mid-hunt to where I wouldn't have got any shots off. There is a 4-hour battery life on this thing, guys. It is advertised. Me trying to save a little bit of money on the CR123 batteries, kind of adding up with how many times I've been using this. Your best bet is probably swapping to a fresh set anytime you take it out on a hunt. Now, if that's a deal breaker to you because you want to use it all the time like I do, recently I've switched over to the rechargeable Surefire batteries, for the reason being that they are the closest I can get to the 3-volt voltage of standard CR123A batteries. The Surefires, the rechargeable ones, are 3.2 volts. Everything else is a 3.7 volt. I am waiting to confirm with Armasight, so I will pin a comment below or overlay it on the screen post-editing what the acceptable voltages to use in this optic are. I'm just not trying to fry the optic if it's not intended to have a 3.7 volt battery. I would probably bet money that you'll be okay, but I'm not personally trying to risk it and be out on this Armasight Contractor 640. Nonetheless, I've had a pretty good experience using the Surefire rechargeables. They're about, I think, $15 to $20 for a set of 2. You can also get a charger. I will have a link in the description below, guys, if that's helpful to you, by the way. So they'll pay for themselves pretty quickly if you want to use them regularly. I personally purchased 3 different sets, so I always have 1 in the scope and then 2 backups on me or on my person when I'm going on a hunt. So I know even if I have to do a quick battery swap, I'm covered for the entire night, 12-hour period if it really comes down to it. Now, I've also learned since the initial review, I don't believe I mentioned this, so I'll mention it now, that you can triple tap the turrets to lock them. They're a little finicky. If you go too fast on the tapping or too slow, it doesn't actually lock the turret. It just kind of goes in and out of the different functions of the buttons themselves. That being said, these turrets are incredibly easy to bump, just given where they're located on the optic. If you're walking around in the dark, you're going to bump it on something, you're going to bump it on yourself. And the downside is that it's going to basically record whatever menu or functions you have pulled up into your video. Me being someone who's trying to share the videos through this, it kind of bothers me if I accidentally record that into the video. May not bother you. Just giving you as much information as possible. If you triple tap the turrets, you're going to avoid accidentally burning that additional information into your video. So if you're trying to share your hunting footage, you're not going to have random adjustments also pulled up, overlaid on the screen. So just a small follow-up there, something I've learned that I don't believe I shared in the initial review. The only issue that still persists that I did mention in the initial review, but I will explain how I've kind of found a workaround, is that after a certain amount of memory has been used up on this optic, it will store all of the footage within the scope, but when you go to transfer it to a computer, after it's reached that cutoff point of internal memory, it won't let you share the files. It basically corrupts them once you try to transfer it, so they become unusable. Now, I mentioned this and go into more detail in the initial review, so check that out if you want to learn more about that. But the workaround is that every other hunt, essentially, I transfer the video files, I kind of date them in a folder, what date they were transferred, and then I will basically format the memory on the optic, clear the footage once I confirm they're on the computer. It adds a little extra step. I'm hoping Armasight comes out with an update. If I am just not aware that there's an update, I will also overlay this here or pin a comment below. So just to follow up on that. But that is my current workaround. So it's a bit of a headache, yes, but it is not the end of the world for me. And if you are someone who doesn't care too much about recording, you just want a reliable thermal optic that's gonna serve its primary function of being a thermal optic without extra bells and whistles, you're gonna have nothing to complain about on the Contractor 640. It is a phenomenal, reliable optic otherwise. So overall, the more I use the Contractor 640, the more I keep falling in love with it. I have the privilege of having experience behind a great number of different thermal optics, and most of them being a 384 base sensor. Now, once you get used to the 640 resolution and you try to go back to a 384 base sensor, that's when it really stands out to you how much more information a 640 base sensor is going to give you. So theoretically, this being at double its base magnification is going to look just as clear as roughly a 384 base sensor at its base magnification. You're going to retain so much more data. There's been times where I couldn't properly identify what kind of animal I was looking at with a 300-ish base thermal optic, but I pull out the Contractor 640 and oh yeah, that's for sure a deer. That's not a hog at 400 yards. Thermal optics can be somewhat limiting in terms of identification ranges. Detection ranges, typically not a problem with most modern thermal optics. You're talking over 1,000 yards, you'll see something glowing. But the Contractor 640 has really helped me reach out to further distances to identify. So it's saving me a substantial amount of time in terms of trying to get closer to animals, potentially scaring them off or scaring other animals that may have been moving through the area just to figure out, oh, that's something I'm not after anyways. So very, very useful having that 640 base magnification, and it's made me really, really like it because of that. So I think that pretty much covers any possible updates to the initial review. Please check that video out if you haven't seen it already. Also, if you want to support the 4MR Ranch channel, I do have an Armasight affiliate link, so shameless plug there. If you're already planning on buying this scope, it's going to cost you nothing extra, but I will get some kickback that I will use that funding to purchase things of this nature so I can continue putting out content like this to the channel. YouTube doesn't really give me any money anymore, guys. It's kind of drying up. It's getting bad. So anything you can do to support any of the gun tubers that you enjoy or find valuable information from, check out. Most of them probably have affiliate links of some form or fashion. It's really helpful to the 2A community, guys. So if you choose to support me, I'd be very, very grateful for that. But other than that, I want to thank you for taking the time to stop by the 4MR Ranch channel. And as always, guys, have a good one.